We've had Bond discussions a few times, and I liked Timothy Dalton as a Bond, but his best role was as the villain in The Rocketeer. It was great.
So villains are villains are better. Villains are always better. The best Mission Impossible character was Philip Seymour Hoffman as a villain. And in a similar turn, Tom Cruise's turn as a villain, so I'm going to make us talk about Collateral again, because I love this movie.
Yeah.
Was as a villain. It was so much cooler. Way cooler.
Timothy Dalton's the villain currently. And what's your Montana show, Garrett? Yellowstone.
Is he? My Montana
There's a spin-off.
show?
Yeah, what's your Montana show?
There's a spin-off. There's a spin-off of Yellowstone, or a prequel or something with Harrison Ford.
1823.
Sure.
Timothy Dalton plays the villain very convincingly.
All of you out-of-state tourists can get really excited about that show. Yeah. I now live in the state, so I have to hate the show.
Yeah, you're a local.
I have to hate the show.
The show about Yellowstone that's filmed in
I'm going to say that it's not filmed in Missoula now, is it?
It's just south of Missoula.
I thought it was out in, I forget where, near, I'm forgetting all these landmarks, out near like Three Forks. No? I thought it was out near
No, it's on the other side of the mountains.
Okay. It's been shifting because some of those early shows were about Montana filmed in Utah, and everybody got upset about it. And then when they moved to Utah, or when they moved to Montana, then everybody got even more upset about it because it brought all the transplantee tourist folk like myself to the state.
Butte loves it. Whole Butte, Montana can use the money. So if you're listening out there in the world, please visit Butte.
So I'm going to make the case that in order for you to be a great villain in a show, Timothy Dalton in The Rocketeer, Tom Cruise in Collateral, you need to also maybe have preceded that with a run as like the white knight, right? Like the protagonist, or like the good guy, the Bond, right? The Ethan Hunts of the world. No.
Maybe. I don't think necessarily. I don't think that Philip Seymour Hoffman ever really got the chance to be a true leading man, and he was a spectacular villain.
You're right.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
I think it's just about the believability, right?
Yeah, sure.
I think more so than villains, there's a believability to it, where I think that especially characters like Bond and Ethan Hunt, like how many times do you get betrayed by your government before it's like, all right, give it up, man. Clearly the government sucks. Like nobody believes you. Why do you still work for them?
I mean, I think it's true. Yeah.
I think it did make that. I did think it made that. I did think it made that Tom Cruise Collateral performance much more compelling, though, that he had been playing the protagonist action hero for so long.
Yeah.
I think it hits on two levels for Tom Cruise specifically, though, because of when Collateral was made. It's like a very post 9/11 character in that they sort of hint at this 3-letter agency tier 1 sort of skill set for a character that clearly was like trained by the American government in some capacity. Like that was the implication. And I think not only in the way he acted, but the way his TTPs when he got into gunfights were so clearly American military, which made him super believable. But I do think you're right, Dave, right? It was an interesting time for that character and his extracurriculars, his real life, and all the other movies he was in, like adds to it.
It's one of my.
You know what I appreciate? Here's what I appreciate about Tom Cruise in probably most, maybe even all of his roles. He either does his own stunts, or all of the action is as close to real or is real, instead of subbing in CGI and stunt double stuff. I love that level of realism.
Well, that's like really that movie specifically. That's like Michael Mann's calling card, right? Like Collateral, get some like former tier 1 soft dudes or SAS dudes or whatever to go out and actually train the actors and run them through 10,000 rounds of shooting positions. Like it makes it really convincing, like gunfights and gunplay.
There's that
which
famous
is really fun to
gunfight in Heat, right? Like on the street. What I always found so interesting about that is the sound design of that gunfight. It's one of the few where like that's just the guns.
Yep.
There's no overdubbing. It's nothing. They're just recording the guns being fired. which is super cool, right? It's that realism piece. Like you can feel the punch of it.
I think that was shown, like that clip was shown to us on repeat at Marine Corps Infantry Officer course as like a fire and movement sort of a reinforcer or get you hyped up before you actually go out and execute the buddy rushing lanes or whatever. Is that the same for you, Dave?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I think it was. Shown off as a good example of covering your buddy's mag change.
Yeah, totally.
From a bank heist movie.
Yeah, you never. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was Marines that were on Michael Mann's consulting staff that consulted on that movie specifically.
I mean, that explains why it's so good.
It's a lucrative career. I've got a buddy who just did consulting for the new A24 movie, Warfare. Obviously, I haven't seen it yet because it comes out this weekend, I think. But he's a SEAL type. So that should be, the movie's about SEALs, makes sense. But it always gets me a little more excited when I know that there's some trusted individuals involved to kind of make it feel correct.
Don't get Dave and me started on SEALs.
Let's not go there.
No.
Let's nerd out. Let's nerd out on guns. Unless it's time to talk real stuff. Let's nerd out on guns.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure, Garrett, you and I have shot one of the pistols from Collateral in Montana.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Suppressed Ruger Mark IV. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark II or Mark IV. Yeah.
It's Mark IV.
Integrally suppressed one. Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know specifically which variant he's got in the show. Maybe we could look that up. But I've got a suppressed Mark IV. And it's so fun. You can shoot it in the backyard. Nobody hears it. Yeah, it's awesome.
That's a fun. That's a great scene in that movie too. That's what he uses he assassinates the jazz guy. I think that's the only time that pistol comes out. I think he probably loses it in the briefcase when he tosses the briefcase because he's carrying around a USP, which I don't have I don't have a Mark, which I'd love because Ruger 22s are awesome. I did carry a USP for years, which is not what it's designed for.
Yeah,
right?
it's not
big and clunky. Well, it's big and clunky. It's got exaggerated features, but I used to carry it because when I was nerding out and shooting pistol competitions and logging failures to fire and stuff, it was just the lowest failure to fire rate. The thing never failed.
Yep.
And so I would take the uncomfortability for reliability.
If somebody steals your briefcase in LA, you're going to wish you had that USP.
Yeah, exactly.
I know we're still riffing on that movie. Jamie Foxx's best role. Maybe Tom Cruise's best role, certainly his most dynamic or interesting. Jada Pinkett Smith is in it. She's pretty good, although isn't shown a whole lot. And Mark Ruffalo,
yeah,
good role,
Mark
good
Ruffalo.
role, good role for Mark Ruffalo. I don't always love a Mark Ruffalo movie, but that one is pretty good.
I'd say for Tom Cruise, it's tied to Tropic Thunder. It's neck and neck.
Yeah.
Cultural touchstones for me. You can learn a lot about Simon real fast by just watching Collateral and Tropic Thunder. It covers
on one 75%. On a future Goat Rodeo podcast outro, I expect, Simon, you dancing to Ludacris in the style of Les Grossman.
Yeah, big on dancing.
Yeah,
that's huge. I've always been really into that.
Speaking of dancing, we've got an agenda to dance through today. But welcome to the Goat Rodeo Podcast. We're three guys who care a lot about national security and technology. We work at the same company called Reveal Technology, and we're all military veterans, and we spend, the better part of an hour talking through news of the day as it pertains to small businesses doing business with the defense and security markets. From the upstart side of things, weaving in some notes, best practices, and conversation around how to enhance your operations, how to think about current events, how to weave in the investor community, and all that stuff. So hopefully it's informative. Give us a follow on the socials and your podcast platform of choice. But dancing into our first topic, Simon, there's all kinds of stuff embedded in this, but I'll just say, apparently Democrats are really upset with Chuck Schumer because the Democrats, specifically the Democratic minority in the Senate, supported moving into full year continuing resolution as opposed to what everybody was expecting as gov shutdown. I'm going to call you out by saying you started out at, something like 50, 60% probability. This is 3-4 weeks ago. to gov shutdown is 75% likely. To 2 weeks ago, you said, I think 90% likely, and then you backed it off to 50-50 last week. Obviously, I think that's indicative of just the political moment that we're in, right? It's just wild and there's chaos. And that's what I've been saying all along, optimistic long-term, all the doji stuff, optimistic long-term. I think it's all good, potentially. And we're resilient to it, even if it's bad in some ways. But near-term is chaos. Enlighten us. I think there continue to be moves, at the congressional level for fiscal year 26, moving into fiscal year 25 and moving into fiscal year 26. What can you tell us? What's the update on this thread?
Well, I have to own it, right? I was incorrect about the shutdown. I don't know that it's as much of a failure of Chuck Schumer as some of the folks on the left want to make it out to be. I actually think it's a different political conversation happening around Chuck Schumer. But I think the real story is the success of Donald Trump. The reason why the estimate was so high for a possible government shutdown was that the right wing of the Republican Party, particularly the Republican Party in the House, the last Congress and for this Congress, was not politically positioned to support a CR. There's a lot of spending in there. These are FY24 budget levels. That's Joe Biden's budget levels. And to see the far right of the House endorse that for another 6 months to round us out of this year, I think is a real victory of the president to get his team on board, with good governance solutions.
Well, it does seem like maybe there's more discipline than we've seen in the past, from a 15-year ago Tea Party, Republican Party kind of contest and all that stuff. But could it? Either it's like good leadership and unity in the Republican Party, or it's a political calculation that gov shutdown would have been far worse than even the bad parts in the Republican perspective from a CR. No,
it's pure Trump. You don't have to look any further than last Congress. They asked the speaker,
but gov shutdown would have been bad for everybody. No,
right,
and even worse than a CR that has some stuff you don't like in it if you're the Republicans.
Yeah, technically, it depends on how long the shutdown goes on. But yeah, generally speaking, gov shutdowns are all bad, right? There's no real winner in a gov shutdown. But I think the killer app here, what for sure, was President Trump inviting in House Republicans to the White House and laying out the plan and getting them on the team. I don't know that there was any more complicated calculations than that, and that the president needs us to ride out the vision here, and they delivered.
Yeah.
And that was when my adjustment came down to 50-50, right? Like once that chess piece had been taken off the table, it was in the court of Chuck Schumer. Are you gonna hold it up or not? Most of the Democrats, I think, wanted to see Chuck Schumer hold it up, not because they know or even really care about how painful a shutdown is, but because they want to send political messages that they're still in the fight, so to speak. So I don't think Chuck Schumer made a wrong decision. Like I said, I don't think a shutdown benefits anybody. But that was the 50-50 calculation. Schumer, once he endorsed the idea of a path forward on the year-long CR, that was it. House cards fell down.
So full year CR is now the thing.
That's it. It's law of the land.
And we also talked last week about the idea that new starts are allowed so long as it's with pre-existing budget, working in line with, whatever the SecDef's priorities and the priorities internal to a program office. Dave, what does this mean for you? We're in full year CR. There's maybe the hint that something could still get unlocked with fiscal year 25 appropriations, which could touch, companies like ours, folks like us operating in the trenches with PEOs who are trying to figure out how to do new starts and prioritize. What does all this mean for you?
Yeah, for me, it largely means execute existing work, leverage existing contracts, while simultaneously, working with our customers to trace the funding for those 17 priorities that probably get that increase. I think contemplated to be like $50 billion or something in total. So intersecting one of those 17 priorities or multiple of those 17 priorities for new work or expanded work onto existing contracts.
Yeah. So we've been talking a bit about the influx of Trump folks, the nominees getting confirmed and put into place. One of those was Steve Feinberg, Deputy Secretary of Defense, and his team. That's coupled up with things like Secretary Hegseth's memo that went out, defining or reinforcing the idea of there are these interesting contracting pathways, software acquisition pathway, OTs, and the like. Use them. How do you see the convergence of maybe that dynamic where it's, not only enhanced efficiency and leveraging existing authorities, but, full year CR budget kind of getting reconfigured? What's the message? What's the takeaway for us, for me, even like if you're advising me, which sometimes you do?
Yeah. So I think that, industry's very much got part of the responsibility here. To make sure that those things get action, both the intention of leveraging OTEs, using the software acquisitions pathway. Like there's a reason why there's a profession of business development, and business development people exist in the defense industry, and often it's customer education. Like there's not inherently an incentive on the government side to understand everything there is to know about acquiring your specific thing in line with your specific business model, size, et cetera. Like this pathway, the software acquisitions pathway, and the OTs are part of that. Like part of the reason the role of business development exists in this space is customer education, the same way that we do it for, say, using a phase 3 SBIR contract. Nobody on the customer side gets offended when you say, here's a slick sheet or here's a summary of the benefits to me and to you. It's already been competed. Here's what the FAR says about it. Here's what the KO would need to do, and be honest and upfront about the limitations. So I think that all of us are out there in the field with, in partnership with our customers, saying here are the constraints and limitations of what we can do with a full year CR. Here's the guidance on OTs. Here's the guidance from the Defense Secretary on the software acquisitions pathway. Here are our recommendations of how you would go about implementing that, taking them or leaving them.
So here's a place where people like me who aren't as deep in the trenches as guys like you are get confused. And it's that this software acquisition pathway and the idea of commercial solution openings, is that right? CSOs and, OT authorities and all that stuff, that's been around for a long time. The software acquisition pathway since 2019 or 2020. What is the hesitance from acquisitions folks to use these pathways, and what's the resistance to it? And where I'm going with this is, like, if you were to advise me or a fellow BD, practitioner of acquisition science from the industry side, if you were going to advise somebody to, like, here are the headwinds you're going to encounter. Here's what the PM's going to say about, those more novel or flexible contracting pathways, and here are the things that you need to enable them to say in response to help navigate that relationship. What do you say? Like, what is all of that?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, all right, first, where's the decision authority? Like, who's the decision maker? Who needs to approve? In most cases, this is a PO actual, or a PO actual and a PM, and a contracting officer who are the decision makers. Who are the requirements writers for this? Like, we need to ensure that the requirement owner, like given a capability development center or other requirement writer, like frames it as a software centric acquisition, provides some clear like recommendations around specific language in the like acquisition strategy document or plan. You also you point to real world examples. It's not that nobody has used the software acquisitions pathway. It's not that nobody has used it before. It's really that it's been used for like really large movements like Kessel Run, Platform One, Army's Global Force Management, that sort of thing. It just hasn't completely trickled down. So this is how you would use it. This is where the authorities exist. This is what it would look like or how it would need to be written. And here's some examples of your counterparts or peers that have used it successfully in the past. And again, like in part of that customer education, you also need to be honest about the limitations. Like this tool is not appropriate, like everything in contracting, like it's not appropriate for everything. CSOs are very appropriate in cases where, it's a one-time software buy that never needs to be iterated upon. They just own it in perpetuity forever and it's installed and it's, or it's matched with a hardware component. The software acquisitions pathway is not appropriate in those cases, and you should use a CSO or something similar. So here are the benefits. Here are also the drawbacks of the cases where you shouldn't use it. Just honest brokerage and education, I think, is the answer.
And Garrett, one of the things that I think I see a lot of frustration from sort of the C-suite set in a lot of times when you see these big pieces of guidance come out of offices like Secretary of Defense or, congressional appropriations, that the speed of implementation and like the flash to bang between that guidance an actual meaningful impact on a business's day-to-day operations is very long. It's always long. So it's hard, I think, a lot of times for operators to draw a straight line between that guidance came out and now it's affecting the way we do business. On top of which, to Dave's point, it requires a ton of proactive customer education and like developing a real teaming relationship with your customers in order to make sure that you're helping them utilize these new tools, because Congress and the SecDef are not going to go office to office and show 100,000 acquisition professionals. here's the list of options. Here's the one that works best for what you do day to day. A lot of times it's on those individuals, and for us as technology providers, as contractors, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're also helping our customer do the right thing and find the fastest, most capable method to do that right thing.
What's the right messaging kind of strategy with our partners on Capitol Hill, members of Congress and their staffs, when it comes to leveraging these kinds of, more dynamic acquisition options, contracting mechanisms? Is there a messaging strategy that we should be thinking about employing when talking to members or their staffs?
That one's tough. You got to remember, every congressional office is a small business into and of itself, right? So those several hundred members, you have this huge chasm of experience level. You're going to find members and member staffs that have no knowledge whatsoever. They've never heard of any of these things. They don't swim in the defense space. And those might be the representatives that, are in the same district as where your company is located. Sure. Or you might live in a district where the chairman of the Armed Services Committee lives, and they are very conversant and they can speak hot and heavy on these topics. So my general advice, such as there can be general advice in the space, is speak to the reps that are there to represent you and educate them as well on your challenges. Even if they are not the sharpest, this may not be their focus areas. All of them are there with the explicit purpose of assisting constituents. So you can give them a lot of insight into problems that they're not going to encounter in their day to day, no matter how interested they are. So it really is. It's an education campaign. It's, hey, this is what we're dealing with day in and day out, and here's the friction points that we experience. And sometimes they're going to take up the mantle of trying to solve those friction points, but not always.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when I'm in startup founder mindset and moving fast or wanting the customer and partners to move faster, sometimes I get frustrated. But in terms of like government working on the pace of multiple fiscal years, and we work on kind of a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. I think that misalignment in terms of urgency and impetus to change and move and improve, often that misalignment results in enhanced friction for folks like us. But I'll say that I think that our efforts over the past many years to influence and shape the thinking of members of Congress and their staff, it probably ends up paying off quite well. In other words, I remember just this year walking the Hill with you, and every member we met, every key staff member we met, and it was probably 10 to 20 of these people, every time we said, Gov shutdown is really bad. CR is not quite as bad, but they're both bad, and that kind of like messaging from whether you're a constituent in the technical in the technical way or not, like that messaging, I think, ends up leaking into their thinking. And I'm not taking any credit, obviously, for like averting shutdown and moving into CR as opposed to shutdown and whatever else. But I think that messaging is important and clear. So maybe one of my recommendations is, if you're an empowered defense technology innovator, whether you're an investor or a small business, aim your energy at your members from your jurisdiction, but also everyone that you meet. Beat that drum, because it can only be useful, I think, over the long term. Simon, you've got some thoughts around the nomination and now confirmation of Steve Feinberg, another, I'll call it, experienced industry person, moving into an empowered, office within government. And just for clarification for listeners, if you were at all familiar with the Biden administration and their team, Kath Hicks was the former Deputy Secretary of Defense and Steve Feinberg has now been confirmed. What does this mean, Simon? Like, how does this actually trickle down to small businesses and innovation economy, or does it not? Is it just virtue signaling?
No, I think this is where it really starts to get interesting. And that's not to say that the Secretary of Defense is not important, but the realm of the possible for the Secretary of Defense is so large that it's rare to ever see a SecDef who gets to really focus down on things the way you saw Kath Hicks focus on Replicator, for example.
Sure.
And I think Feinberg is uniquely positioned to play a similar role. He has a unique private sector experience. He's got a chief of staff in Colin Carroll that brings a lot of interesting experience. And that's
just quick shout out, Colin Carroll, 2nd Recon Battalion, reconnaissance guy, Marine. Just quick call out. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, no, because the Marine Corps running the OSD, it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. But I think the folks that exist in those roles, those deputy roles, those chief of staff roles, often are the intellectual engines for the memos that you see come out that are driving these big picture guidance. Because your SecDef is essentially the highest political appointee in the Department of Defense. It's a political position. They are fielding everything from what's happening in Ukraine to transgender troops to grooming standards. Like it's a massive universe. Whereas Feinberg is going to get to really drill down. And I think that's where you're going to see, similar to what we saw with Hicks and Replicator, some really interesting policies that I'm hopeful will generate a lot of energy for the kind of companies that Feinberg interacted with in his civilian experiences, in his civilian position from that equity side of the house. I think we're going to see a preference for non-traditionals, fast problem solving, and just some new thinking that's been at the sort of the periphery of the Department of Defense for a long time, but now has this opportunity to kind of step into the limelight. And I think it's going to have a trickle-down effect for everybody. As I think as you have more established startups like Palantir and Anduril that have been around a little bit longer than some others, but as they kind of fleet up a tier, that creates a vacuum below, right? There's just more opportunity space for new and young companies to get involved, and opportunity generated from success. People are going to become more comfortable with non-traditional contractors as they see them succeeding in these bigger programs of record. So I think it's a really exciting time for the industry.
Well, I want to pull on a thread about DepSecDef Kath Hicks Replicator initiative and whether that continues and how in a minute. But I'll just say, like, this whole concept of like slimming down and streamlining software acquisitions, and so we've been hearing about this for so long, but still see the department preferring exquisite, overpriced, hardware-centric or services-centric contracts rather than pure software. I'll just say I'll believe it when I see it. I really hope that it happens, especially as a company that is selling software. But believe it when I see it, and I am hopeful. I think that if there was an administration and a leadership within the defense establishment, this might be the one. So I wish them well. Dave, we've been doing this, startup defense tech dance for a good number of years at this point. Over the period where like things like the Raider Fund and Replicator became these kind of like big, symbolic almost, but certainly well endowed initiatives that were supposed to accelerate the adoption of certain kinds of technologies in support of certain types of missions in the world, Indo-PACOM focused mostly, et cetera, et cetera. And in the case of Replicator, small drone, kind of high volume small drone stuff, maybe in particular in response to Ukraine stuff. But what do you expect to see from those types of programs? Replicator, Raider, Pacific Defense Initiative, that sort of thing. Did any of that actually end up trickling down into the innovation economy, like, touching companies like ours? Was it mostly virtue signal? Was it symbolic only? Did it actually field capability? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so far, most of those programs have been largely a front door for companies like ours. I don't think that, nesting your entire business under Raider or Pacific Deterrence or something is an advisable strategy. I think that those are to front doors to move capability quickly and then transition to a much more sustainable programmatic adoption sort of pathway. I think that, you know, our front door reveal was DIU, which is appropriate. And these are other, you know, front doors to get to what's the real game, which is, you know, funding that's planned and budgeted over years for the life cycle sustainment cost of buying and fielding and maintaining capability.
Well, I'll just say that our company is adjacent to, maybe even deeply implicated with the robotics and small drone components of all of the things the services are doing. So I'll say that it was encouraging that Replicator came about. The first major award went to a 70-year-old quote, you know, startup, close quote. I won't even call it a startup, a 70-year-old aerospace and defense company called AeroVironment, which builds a lot of great tech. They're certainly the most proliferated small drone company in the world, at least up until, you know, the past couple of years. But it was kind of like, I understood what DIU and the Replicator Initiative were doing. They were kind of proving the pipes. You know, they were kind of like showing that they could move and contract at that volume. But it was still pretty disappointing to see the largest single contract award from that early Replicator aimed at a very large legacy defense prime contractor. And I think it's just about to happen again. Or it just did recently, Simon.
I want to pull on a thread there because this is a sort of like the enemy gets a vote. I'm not saying AeroVironment's the enemy, but it's a good mental framing for this because big companies are going to adjust the way that they're doing business in order to fit into these pipes.
Sure.
And I think that's another way in which AeroVironment has been really successful is operating a very large, older company like it's a startup. Even just adjusting your mentality enough to be able to be chasing after DIU money well before it's in vogue can give you a serious competitive advantage.
Sure.
And to the point that we were talking about earlier is, you know, can this acquisition framework adjust itself out of this services and hardware model? At the same time, you're going to see really smart software startups start to do hardware and services in order to short circuit it. You're going to do whatever you can to win. And
yeah, totally.
I think we would all do it if we were given the chance. You know, DoD looks at you and says, love your software. Can you build this box for me? And say, yes. Yeah, I can build that box.
Sure.
Let's go.
Sure. We've done that too, just to meet like program requirements that don't seem to make a ton of sense, but it is what they want to buy. And okay.
Yeah. So you got to remember in the history of DoD, most of the time, the contractors end up looking like the customer, not the other way around. It's going to be very hard for a startup to change the way the DoD looks, but it's very easy for DoD to change the way a startup looks just by pointing you in the right direction with some money and some contract vehicles.
Do you think that it helps when pursuing those kinds of awards and those kind of innovative programs to wear Share Tour shirts? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly helps, but unfortunately, people like you can't do that because this is vintage, and it's not something you can just go buy on the internet.
Oh, that's too bad. For those who are just listening, Simon is rocking a beautiful shirt.
2014 Dress to Kill tour specifically, but no big deal.
Did you go to a show during?
Absolutely not. It was like entirely in Las Vegas. No chance. Also, in 2014, I was finishing up my bachelor's degree on the GI Bill after my sabbatical in the desert.
You could still be a Cher fan at that age. It's all good.
Oh no, I was broke.
Oh, broke.
Extremely poor. Cher tickets are not cheap.
That makes
Vegas
sense.
Is not close.
Well, good on you for wearing that and supporting
thanks.
the cause.
Don't worry, we're working our way up. It won't be long until we're meeting with members of Congress while I wear Cher t-shirts, so it should be pretty solid.
Great. Yeah, tell me what shirt I should be. Yeah. Tell me
last words from your boss. Great.
Tell me what shirts I should be wearing if it's not suit and tie because
Buck Mason, man, we've been over this.
That's true. Yeah, Buck Mason.
You got to be your authentic self. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Which I mean, this is a classic startup thing though. At the same time, the idea that like how I dress matters less than what I do and what the outcome is.
Sure. I think that's been a useful thing over the past, decade or two of, the rise of Silicon Valley chic and all that stuff. Yeah.
I think it aligns with veterans in a big way. I mean, I think the military, particularly war fighters and those of us that had to like sleep in the dirt. I wore what I needed to wear for work. I didn't get dressed up. So there's some synergy there, I think.
I think that makes sense. Well, whether we wear Cher Dress to Kill Tour 2014 shirts to the Hill or not, to maybe bring us back on topic, companies like AeroVironment, and I give them a lot of credit, and they deploy a ton of really great capability. And they are good partners for our company too. But one of the major advantages that you have being either a publicly traded, well-endowed, publicly traded defense, vendor, which encapsulates all the legacy prime contractors, and even many of the more well-endowed upstarts, the Andurils of the world. What they do deploy is an incredibly powerful, heavyweight lobbying capability, right? And we've seen that on full display. I think that can be very useful. Sometimes it feels kind of like a grift, when viewed from the outside. But I do think members of Congress and senior policymakers and uniformed leadership view much of that lobbying effort as educational and useful, if not outright, stacking the deck in favor of one or another vendor. You see that at close hand, Simon. What does that mean for small companies like ours? And the lesson that I learned early on was we need to invest in a lobbying capability, not to compete necessarily, but simply to proliferate our message and gain more visibility. Is that something we would dial in as like a recommendation? Start early, start often.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, I think, if you're going to be selling to the government, whether it's defense specific or not, you need to have some sort of mechanism to communicate with the government at every level in which you are implicated. And the reality is that Congress is implicated in everything, right? That's where the funding starts. So it is true top of the funnel engagement. I think folks across the nation underestimate the extent to which congressional staffers are just young public servants who want to do the right thing. They're not particularly well paid. They're usually fairly early in their career, and they are very, in my experience, and I know most people's experience, they are open recipients of anyone who walks in the door with a good idea or with a problem to solve. So you'll find some really captive audiences. The challenging part, of course, is the speed of bureaucracy, which is, you see it in Congress, you see it in DoD, you'll see it in any large entity like that. But there's an infinite amount of opportunity to influence the way in which DoD is resourced and the way DoD expends those resources from congressional engagement. I encourage everyone to do it. Finding the right size for where you are as a company is challenging. A lot of people, I find, don't want to hire lobbyists, consultants outside GovRel, but oftentimes you have to. It's going to be hard to find a staffer that is fresh off the Hill and ready to take half as much salary to work in-house for your company than they would get if they went to be a lobbyist. So I encourage everyone to retain some consultants, whenever you have the budget to do so, and start going to the Hill.
Yeah, we did that early based on recommendations coming out of conversations that we had with the Palantir and Anduril leadership back in like 2018, 2019. It was not a matter of like whether or not to lobby. It's you should already be doing this either through consultants and outside engagements or directly yourselves from the earliest days, because that ends up being essential. Dave, what do you recommend, or how do you negotiate weaving together congressional support and lobbying, call it the consultant layers of going to market, with just kind of straight leg BD and program penetration efforts that, an account executive or a salesperson would do when encountering, a defense buyer? How do you weave those together?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, it doesn't matter what the strategy is. The first thing is always the user energy and the customer energy and excitement, right? Above all else, before you ever approach Capitol Hill or try to get support or whatever, you have to make a really good thing, and the community has to want it, and you have to align all those ingredients that I'm always talking about: needs, interest, requirements, funding, contract, and priority. And and where Capitol Hill gets involved is, in the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution cycle that we currently have, the rate at which a capability can be adopted is sometimes very slow. Playing out over multiple years. And I think when you have like an energetic customer that has all of the recipes and has the user demand and the user signal and has requirements they're trying to fulfill, but didn't project for this capability out several years ago because it either didn't exist or hadn't been on their radar, or they didn't have a program that's appropriate for accommodating it. That's where you can go and get some Capitol Hill support involved.
And just maybe to break in, when you don't do that correctly, and maybe you go to Congress first with a thing that maybe isn't as useful as you think it is to the end user, a seeming success story that can emerge out of that is that there's this top-down kind of appropriation-led cram down of a capability down the throats of users who really don't care about this technology, don't know how to use it. It's not built into their kind of concepts or their training pipelines or whatever else, and it ends up getting shelved, even though the company in question has slotted tens of millions of dollars of purchase orders and delivered capability. It isn't necessarily good for that end user ecosystem to just kind of like generate all that noise and suck up all that oxygen. So I think you're on the right track there.
Exactly. It's only appropriate when you're solving a problem.
That's right.
Or when Capitol Hill is potentially solving a problem for your customer who is already energetic.
Yep.
Only lacks one critical component. And they're honestly, frustrated they can't move faster or go further.
Yeah. I mean, one of those things that occurs when PPB and palming and plans and everything else aren't adequately forecasting the needs of the present. Drone warfare, small drone warfare has been one of those items. It wasn't forecasted 10 years ago that the new modern 21st century mode of combat was going to be infantry trench lines deploying, one-way attack, kamikaze small drones, and robot on robot warfare. I think one of the things you wanted to talk about today was this December drone assault that happened near Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine on the Russia-Ukraine front. Do you want to break that down a bit?
Yeah, so this happened in December. However, it's sort of making its rounds, and I think there's new video available. Ian might be able to help us out with the video, but that it felt pretty important, like a fundamental shift in sort of the way bleeding edge tactical warfare is conducted, because this was a 100% all robotic assault. There was no infantry maneuver component to it. It was UAS and UGVs, so drones and ground robotics. It was really interesting that it was even attempted, much less as successful as it was. I think one of the salient points coming out of it was we're now on a battlefield where a robotic assault can be conducted completely by robotics capabilities. However, the limiting factor from the people that employ those robotics capabilities or that robotic attack was definitely that the ground robotics component was lacking, in that it's hard to get UGVs. It's hard to get UGVs to the target, the ones that were loaded with explosives or machine guns, onto the target. There's a terrain routing component. There's a wheels stuck in the mud component, and the takeaway was that this is probably going to be a thing that we're going to address in the future. But the infantry very much still plays as a teammate and a partner for the robotic systems.
Yeah. So what we're referencing is a Wall Street Journal great piece in the Wall Street Journal from I think 2 or 3 days ago that kind of details some of this. Pretty incredible. I mean, it makes total sense that you start seeing not only the incredible amount of investment in private sector kind of innovation economy activity in the aerial robotic space, but even in the ground robots and surface robots. But companies like Forterra, formerly RRAI, doing ground robotic stuff. I mean, it just makes all the sense in the world. And then surface and subsurface stuff in the maritime environment, it makes tons of sense. Given what's going on, across that Russia-Ukraine front. Simon, were you going to bust in there?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I want to highlight in the article is very much trying to paint this picture of a drone-only battle, which is not true. The drones were attacking manned positions. So the offense was drone-only, but the defense was not. And I think there is a tendency to think of this in such a way that, again, this is common military stuff. The enemy gets a vote. So we think about it, the way we operated is the way the battle went. But from the Russian perspective, it's entirely different. It's infantrymen fighting against drones. There is a good quote in the article where a Russian soldier says, "I've never seen a Ukrainian soldier. I've only seen Ukrainian drones."
На поле боя ни одного украинца солдата не видел, кроме дронов ничего. Только когда в плен сдался. Только дроны. А их стаями.
Yeah.
And it's probably the same way in reverse at this point of the war.
Totally.
Where Russian offensives are drones and robotics against manned positions. You're constantly going to be looking for how do you use these robots to attack manned positions, because that is sort of the belly button.
Yeah, I mean,
force.
You make this point a lot, Simon, and I've had the benefit of hearing you sling this this talk track, in public, and it's amazing, and it's that. Yes, they're drones, and it's getting all like the coverage and media hype and all that stuff, but there are still infantry tasks that are required to get in a position to launch the drones. In other words, you have to build the logistics capability that creates a frontline effect, and you have human beings out there either digging trench lines or operating the machines that are digging trench lines and establishing fortifications and everything else. So I think for the near term, and probably for some longer than intermediate term, you're going to have serious requirements, it may be changing requirements, but certainly requirements to bulk up the infantry and maneuver components of militaries and security forces. This all robotic future, I think, is a little bit hyperbolic and overstated. That is not to say that robotic platforms aren't incredibly valuable. They are, but they are not the only thing operating in this battle space. And I don't think will ever fully displace, at least not in our lifetimes, ever fully displace the human element in close proximity and teaming with and fighting against robots and other humans.
Yeah, I think there's going to be an interesting tactical conversation at some point where an all drone and all robotics attack can be stopped in its tracks if you can find the nerve center that's coordinating this attack, right? Like all of your things will fall out of the sky if you can just knock out the operators. And you saw this a little bit with some of the wire operated drones, where Russians have started following those fiber optic cables back to where they're being operated from. I don't have to defeat your drones if I can just knock out your operators.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think it goes a long way toward explaining why intelligence capabilities and analytic capabilities are going to continue to remain relevant, and maybe even in particular the electronic warfare and radio frequency spectrum.
Totally. Because signal discipline,
signal management. I know, Dave, you encounter stuff in that category all the time, but we're seeing the rise of, again, to tie in the investor defense tech, upstart innovation ecosystem, we're seeing a lot more investing activity in that flexible, lightweight, even commercial off the shelf COTS, electronic warfare and signals intercept, signals prosecution, jamming capability set. And it's certainly the case that Ukraine, Russia, and the specter of a Taiwan Strait crisis and the stuff that we keep seeing, in the periphery of Israel, are all just leading us into this future where humans and machines and the signals environment are more tightly fused than ever.
It did.
Yeah, go ahead.
It did remind me, just for anybody that reading that article, it did remind me back in 2018. I don't know if either of you have ever read the Mad Scientist blog that's maintained by Tradoc. There was a really good one back in 2018 that basically predicted this future. It's written in narrative form. It's called Demons in the Tall Grass. It's really good. It's also very terrifying. The narrative is, U.S. vice Russian forces or something like that, and a Green Beret basically pulls up instead of with a Green Beret team with a tractor trailer full of robotics capabilities, and it talks through the conflict from the Russian perspective. And it's absolutely terrifying and a super fun read. Yeah. And it's also like a 3-minute read.
What sci-fi military fiction have you read recently, Simon? Anything? Or are you a Heinlein guy? Are you a Heinlein person? Are you a hard sci-fi guy? Soft sci-fi? What are you into?
It's been a while since I've read sci-fi. I think the last one I read was a series called Ancillary Justice. which is about like, you know, the morality of AI in a lot of different ways. Children of Time was another one I read recently. But it's been a little while. I did rewatch Elysium the other night, which if you haven't seen Elysium, everyone should see Elysium. It's a phenomenal Matt Damon movie.
There are a few of those. Yeah, there are a few of those good Matt Damon options. I read recently, I'll say that I reread a book called The Profession by Stephen Pressfield, which imagines a contractor-heavy near future where nukes have proliferated and there's instability in the United States government, and it kind of follows like a Julius Caesar type character, and it's pretty interesting. And it doesn't touch as heavily on kind of the robotic future. I think it's about 10 years old at this point, but it certainly alludes to the idea that things are changing and great power conflict might be on the horizon, and instability in Western democracies is a real thing. Interesting stuff. Dave, you reading anything recently? I know that you're maybe not reading as much as you might want to be, given how much work you're doing recently.
I'll put it this way: between Reveal, the still part-time service in uniform, and the 4 children, my dad recently published a novel that's still sitting on my nightstand that I haven't finished.
Ooh, okay.
Good for him.
Well,
that's my next career jump. I'm gonna start writing. It's gonna be great.
There's some good Marine, fiction writers out there, Simon. Stephen Pressfield, Vietnam Marine, Elliot Ackerman,
So my all-time, I don't think he was Marine, but is Glenn Cook. Glenn Cook's a fantasy writer who's a Vietnam vet, who specifically wrote from the perspective of the enlisted man, which I thought was a very novel way of applying his experience in the Vietnam War to like fantasy settings, which I thought was super cool. But otherwise, I don't know that I read a ton of veteran writers.
Maybe you should start. There's some good ones. There's some good ones out there. Okay. I'm going to go forego some last word material and instead just encourage everybody to follow us on the socials, follow us on your podcast platform of choice. Send your notes. We're eager to upgrade, up level, and improve, and hit the topics that you're interested in, whether it's startup advice from the trenches, engaging Congress, technology stuff, how to negotiate at the crossroads of venture capital, defense technology, and the U.S. government as a primary buyer, or anything in between. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.